Hi team, and welcome to episode 23 of the Health is Wealth podcast. And today I'm joined by our amazing client, Stephen Heels. And basically what I'm going to do is get into straight away. Steve, can you introduce yourself, please? Let us know what you do, and we can give them a bit of a background why we're doing this podcast and what we're going to cover today.
100%. Yeah, thanks, Craig. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, my name's Stephen Heels, and my background is in cognitive behavioural psychotherapy, CBT, and counselling. I've worked as a mental health professional for about 20 years, helping people with all sorts of ranges of problems. And what I do at the moment is I work clinically as a clinician, helping people who are ill, if you like, with mental health problems, stress, and I also work with executives as well, help them look at their sources of stress and how to manage that. So that's it in a nutshell, really. Okay,
so brilliant. Like, as you can imagine, Steve, like working with executives over the last 6 years, 7 years, they're busy.
Yeah.
So sometimes, like, there's a lot of stress involved, with that position. The guys we're working with who are in this group and in our community, some of them are CEOs, some of them business owners. We work with some doctors at the moment, and as you can imagine, like, life gets really stressful. How would you like help someone that was dealing with stress, Steve? How would you, what actions in place would you put in for them that's going to help them get out of that constant sympathetic like mode and move people more into the parasympathetic?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's probably, if we can rewind a little bit, I think it's going to help to understand how cognitive behavioural therapy understands the psychology of someone and where their sources of stress actually come from. So in CBT, we use something called the 5 areas. So we can analyse any situation through 5 areas. So the areas are: what is the situation that's going on? What are our thoughts in relation to that situation? How does that contribute to an emotional response? What happens in our physiology, so racing heartbeat and tension and so forth? And then behaviorally, what we do to cope. So situation, thoughts, emotions, physiology, and behavior. So we can take that as a model and we can map out. It's like taking a photograph, a snapshot of someone's life of what's going on. And we use that as a foundation to understand all sorts of problems, whether it's stress or mental health problems, or relationship difficulties, you name it. We can use that as our microscope to see what's going on there. And generally, we would say that thoughts is at the start of the cycle there. And the brain is always looking out for danger. That's the brain's job. Yes, it's got other functions for the body and things like that, but its ultimate function is to keep us alive and to keep us safe. So your brain's always on and it's always scanning for dangers. So, for instance, if you're walking across a road and you don't see a car coming, you want your brain to tell you there's something coming so you can get out of the way. That's a very functional response. The brain's not very good at differentiating between an actual threat and an imagined threat. So if we have a thought, how am I going to pay my bills? That can be a threat-focused thought, and these thoughts can trigger the emotional response, which is the nervous system, and that releases cortisol into the bloodstream and so forth, which we know too much of that is not good for anybody. So we're looking at identifying what are the triggering stress-related thoughts first of all, and then looking at how we can change those appraisals. because they're very quick. You know, a lot of these thoughts are subconscious, and we might not even realize that we're having stress-related thoughts until eventually the stress is accumulating to a level where we start to physically feel it in the body, and we might start to cope with it in dysfunctional ways like avoiding things or drinking alcohol and so forth.
So Steve, like, how would, like, what type of actions would you tell someone like to put in place that's going to help them in the moment? You know, is there anything like you could give us that's going to give them value around that? Like, you know, what's gonna, is it like, is there a link between thoughts, stress, and physical health?
100%. So if you think you're going through your day, you're a busy executive, or, you know, you don't necessarily be an executive, but you're having a very busy time. And sometimes life feels out of control. You know, we're juggling so many balls and so forth. So a phrase I like to use with the people I work with is control the controllables. We might be going through a lot of stuff, you know, kind of all sorts of moving balls, but what do I actually have control over? And you have control over your mind, and you have control over your body and your actions. So we would say, look, let's put our response to stress into two categories. So the first category is what we call problem-focused coping skills. So is there a problem? Can I do something about it? So let's say if I'm stressed because my car needs an MOT, I might say, right, can I do anything about this? Well, I can't fix the car because I'm not a mechanic, so no, but I can book it in. So I can ring the garage and I can start to take action. Now that problem's managed, it's not necessarily it's not necessarily gone, but it's managed. So anything that we can control, we've got to take action. The other bit, which is generally under-nurtured by most people, is what we call the emotion-focused coping skills. So this is when things are out of our control, or there's nothing more we can do about an issue. We've got to learn to be, and to wait and be patient. I'll give you an example from my life. I once went through a horrendous divorce, very, very stressful. And there was nothing I could do except answer, you know, my solicitor's emails when they said, can you send this form in, or we need to see a bank statement, or whatever. Now, that's all I could do. I could just reply to my solicitor. I couldn't do anything about the outcome of the divorce. That would have been decided by a judge in court. So what can I control? I can control the controllables. I can get myself out of the house for a walk. I can go at the gym. I can drink water. I can catch up with my friends, etc. So I'm really focusing on being as present as I possibly can. Things like breathing, meditation, relaxation, these things. And a little tip for anybody that's listening. Breathing exercises, you've got to set yourself a baseline. And you've got to we often become socialized for stress, so we don't realize we're stressed until we're really feeling it. So think of a scale from 0 to 100. Some people might be operating at 70 or more stress and not even realize, because they've got so used to it. So you've got to start to tune into your stress so you can get that 70 down. You can start to notice your stress as it's starting to emerge in your body, and you might find yourself worrying as well. So that's number one, is awareness, rate my stress level, and get used to finding out where your baseline is. Then you want to get your baseline down, and this is about emotional regulation. So breathing, you know, 2 or 3 minutes breathing space. If you're a 70 and after 3 or 4 minutes, you can do a breathing exercise or a meditation, and you can get that down to 50. Well, that's a win, and that's going to start to shift us from being in threat mode to being in what you call a fight or flight mode into rest and digest mode.
Yeah. Which the fight or flight is, you know, the sympathetic. The rest and digest is the parasympathetic. Just so the listeners understand. So Steve, like, as you can imagine, you know, I've worked with a lot of clients over the years, and, you know, I do get clients that come to me and they say, well, I strive off stress. You know, I like stress makes me feel good, you know, but like, that's not going to be good for the individual if they're constantly in a stress state. Obviously, high levels of cortisol can lead to all different, you know, diagnoses. But like, how would you deal with someone like that if they like was to say like, I strive off stress, I'm okay, stress is not the problem?
So stress is an interesting word, and again, we put it into two categories. You can have something called eustress, which is healthy stress. You know, you go to an interview, it's stressful. That's a healthy stress, right? Because it tries to help with our performance and so forth. So you can have a level of stress that helps motivate and drive you towards things. For instance, when we were Neanderthals, we'd use stress because we're hungry, we're stressed, we've got to find food. So that's about survival. So stress is a healthy thing, but there's a fine line between eustress and distress. And the distress is the bad stuff. We don't want to go past that line where it starts to become a dysfunctional way of coping with things. So, like I said, a lot of people get socialized to stress, and they might feel pretty good at levels of stress of 70, 80, 90, but we know it's not good for your body and for your mind. We would also probably look back in time and say, you know, where is stress? How have we framed stress as a good thing for us at high levels? And that might be coming from childhood. It could be due to childhood trauma, or maybe perfectionist traits, or, you know, all sorts of other personality things that might give us a sense of, if I'm operating at 90% stress, I'm doing a great job, I'm thriving, my business is doing well, etc., etc. So there may be some dysfunctional beliefs around what stress means, because ultimately we know, and I like to use this analogy of a car, if you're driving your car at 100 miles an hour, sooner or later it's going to break.
Yeah,
it's better to go at 60, take it in for a bit of service and a bit of self-care and oil change and so forth, because you're going to go a lot further in that car's going to have a longer life. So understanding what are our beliefs around what does stress mean for us, what level of stress we're operating at. Are we operating at 80 or 90? We need to change that, and maybe thinking about, have we developed an unhealthy relationship with stress through past experience, personality, perfectionism, worry, etc., etc. And that's where you might need, you know, someone like myself to really sit down with you and go through things in a bit more depth there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Steve. That's great. So how would someone deal with the stress of like around food in general? Now, what I mean by that, Steve, as you probably know, a lot of people, and I'm quite one of them myself, because I don't drink alcohol, my release when I'm stressed is, you know, a lot of the time I can turn to food. Yeah. How would you use like CBT, you know, to like in that situation?
Yeah. Again, we'd look at, what beliefs do you have about food? Is there a belief that food is a good thing, or a stress reliever or something? So we'd look at, you know, where do those beliefs come from, and what can we do to start to shift those beliefs to a better position. Food's an interesting one, because things like chocolate, you know, and you could say alcohol at times, they're very good because they give you dopamine hits.
Of course, yeah.
The idea of instant gratification, and, you know, as we know, when you're training and things, it's all about learning to delay gratification. We want the great body now and so forth, and it's more about following that plan, steady away with the plan, following the nutrition, following the exercise, etc. So it's about recognizing that there's an urge, changing the behavior and the thoughts around that urge. And looking at some of the habits around that. So if someone's buying, you know, alcohol, let's not buy alcohol. Let's buy something else, or let's change the percentage of alcohol. If someone's buying chocolate and crisps, etc., and those are their go-to stress relievers, how do we shift that? Can we change the behavioural response there? So instead of going for the crisps, I go for, you know, a handful of grapes or some nuts. Or I might even say, right, I feel this urge, I want to go in the fridge, but you know what, I'm going for a walk instead. So there's, you know, we can approach things from different ways in CBTs by looking at the people's thoughts about food, etc. What emotional response that gives that person, you know, that dopamine hit, and how do we find that from in other things, and what do we do behaviorally to really change the function of that kind of stress relief seeking behaviors.
Right. Okay. So Steve, I know, like previous, when you and I have spoke about things like breathing techniques to help bring the cortisol levels down. Is there any advice you can give, like, people around that? Like, what is the best approach to use, like, in a moment? Now, let me say someone like myself or whoever was going to do a presentation in front of 1,000 people.
Right.
Yeah, there's going to be anxiety. There's going to be high levels of, you know, cortisol. How would like someone manage the nerves or self-doubt around that?
Yeah.
Steve, like, sure. would they put in the, you know, is there any breathing techniques that could help with that? You know,
there's a couple of things. I think what we've got to be in mind, what you said there was, you know, they might be anxious. So we would see anxiety as purely what happens in the body.
Yeah.
Physical tension, racing heartbeat, trembling, these kind of things. So you can do some very simple relaxation techniques, including breathing. For instance, if you notice your shoulders are tense before you're going on stage, drop your shoulders. You know, we want, stress is like us being a wound up spring. So we want to unwind that. So literally, we want to unwind tension from the body. So we take a few minute breathing space, a 3 or 4 minute breathing space. And like I said earlier, set yourself a baseline. What number am I? Breathing technique. The one I like to do is called box breathing. So it's breathing for 4, hold it for 2, breathe out for 4, hold it for 2. Because when we get stressed or anxious, we tend to hyperventilate, tension creeps in, and that causes the chest to really kind of tense up. So we want to unwind that with the breathing. So we're going to rate ourselves, we're going to do our box breathing, and then we're going to rate ourselves afterwards. And we want to be seeing that little shift from 70 to 50 or whatever. We might be worrying about, I'm going to, you know, this is going to go rubbish, or I'm going to make a mistake, or I'm going to say something wrong, or I'm going to get judged, etc. So that's all about what's going on in the mind. That's nothing to do with the body. That's these threat-focused thoughts or worries. So we've got to learn to be present. And the technique that we use is what you call attention training or selective attention training. So it's learning to be in the now, not in the future. Because if you think about it, if you're stood waiting to go on stage and you're worrying about how you're going to perform on stage, your mind's going off into the future. Even it might only be 2 or 3 minutes into the future, but you're not on stage, right? So you're at the side of the stage. So you've got to be present where you are. And the way to be present is through all your senses. So what you can see, what you can hear, what you can smell, and so forth.
Yeah.
For instance, you could go for a walk down the street, and all the time you can be worrying about things. Well, then you're not present. You need to be on your walk. You need to be looking around, and what can you see? What can you touch? What can you smell? What can you hear? And so on and so forth. So again, that's something that I teach people, and we go into in a lot of depth in terms of developing the attention, because the attention's untrained. Many people's attention is not trained. It's like a wild horse. It'll run wherever it wants to run, and it generally runs into the future where worry's concerned. So we've got to learn to be present. If you go to YouTube and just type in CBT, selective attention, there's some great exercises on there to help people really develop their attention muscle, if you like. We're good at training our muscles, physical muscles, but how often do we pay much attention to training our attention muscle? Because just to finish on this last point, your mind is different from your attention. Think about your mind as a container that holds your memories, your worries, your thoughts, your images. That's your mind. For instance, right now, if everybody can think of a red apple in their mind's eye. So we've created an image, a mental image in our imagination of a red apple. Now shift that to an orange. So now we've changed the content of our mind to an orange. Now what we're doing, we're giving attention to those thoughts of an orange. So let's just shift that attention, and I want everybody to focus their attention on their left big toe. And now their right elbow. So my point here is you have control over your attention and what you do with it. You can shift it. You can spend time listening. You can spend time looking. You can disengage from your mind, because your mind is different from your attention. You can't really control your mind, because your mind's job is to be switched on. It's there to be looking out for threat, like I said earlier. So all sorts of thoughts will come into your mind, but you do have power over your attention. So the phrase is pay attention to your attention. And if you notice yourself engaging with stress-focused thoughts, you've got to shift that mind into being as present as you possibly can.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. That's great, Elsie. And just to finish off, Steve, like let's say someone's in the moment, they're having a stressful day. Is it the box breathing that you would recommend to help them bring them cortisol levels down to move them more into the parasympathetic?
Yeah, I would say that's a good start. Think of stress like a thermometer. Your thermometer is always heating up, always. Our role is to cool that down. So these emotional focused skills like breathing and meditation and stuff, those are the strategies that you go to reduce that thermometer down. Sometimes that's a challenge for someone who might be an excessive worrier. So we'd need to look at what's driving the worries. And again, that's a bit more of a deeper piece of work, but being conscious about that stress level. What number am I? Rate yourself 2, 3, 4 times a day. And if you know you're above 50, you've got to be, just like going to the gym, you go to the gym every day, you've got to be planning time in to settle yourself down there through the breathing exercise. And why I'm a big advocate of breathing is because, number one, we can see it working very quickly, and there's a lot of evidence, and that's what that's why CBT is very powerful and has the edge, in my opinion, over all other kinds of things like NLP and different counselings and therapies, because it's evidence-based. We know the stuff we teach clients actually works from the evidence base.
Brilliant. Love it. Steve, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, Steve, which I'll put your detail in the notes as well, but how can they get in touch with you if they did want to work with you, Steve? Yeah,
so they can find me on LinkedIn. Just Google, search for Stephen Heels on LinkedIn, and you can put me a message there.
I'll put all the details at the bottom of the podcast as well in the notes as well. So Steve, I just want to say thank you very much for your time today. I really appreciate it. I feel like a lot of people will take a lot away from this, and obviously being in the community, in the health is wealth executive, maybe if clients wanted to reach out to you to discuss possibly working with you on the CBT side of things, I'm sure you don't mind them messaging you within the Slack group. Yeah, is that okay?
100%. Yeah.
Excellent.
Always need help.
Time, Steve. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.